Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library, and I have a great story to tell you. 3 to 4 billion years ago, when Earth was still a young planet, life forms appeared in its primordial ocean. For almost 3 billion years, these life forms remained very small, made of a single cell for most of this period. But they multiplied, they diversified, and slowly changed the chemical composition of the seas. Then suddenly, about 540 million years ago, the number of marine species, their variety, and their sizes increased dramatically in an event called the Cambrian Explosion. All sorts of creatures, mollusks, fish, crustaceans, radiated and formed more and more complex food chains. From there, they would colonize the land and sometimes return to the sea. This is the journey I invite you tonight. We're going to travel in time and discover how marine life evolved, how it appeared, or what we think we know of it. How groups of species rose to the top of their food chains and fell, and what happened when extinction events reshuffled the deck repeatedly. We will discover many extinct species of spectacular sea creatures, some of which were the largest ones to ever live on Earth, from sea scorpions and giant armored fish to marine reptiles, as well as extinct life forms that would look very strange to us. But first, I would like to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project. Get more of it and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. We let people contribute what they wish or can, and everyone gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. If you join, you will gain access to various new features. For example, you will have the option to listen to all episodes with or without background sounds. And you can download all these audios and participate in selecting future topics. We also offer advanced releases and updates on upcoming episodes. There are also many stories only available to our Patreons. You will find a link in the description box and the first comment pinned under the video. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later, or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now we are ready to begin our exploration. And it starts 3.5 billion years ago in the depths of Earth's oceans. How and when did life begin in our planet's oceans? We just have theories about this based on geological evidence and also the formation models of Earth and the solar system. The first question is how oceans appeared. Earth formed by an accretion of space dust and asteroids containing all the elements that are now inside it and at its surface. Mostly iron, oxygen, hydrogen, silicon, and carbon. For a long time, it was thought that most of Earth's water came from other regions of the solar system and had been delivered later in its history through a bombardment of water-rich asteroids in the late stages of the formation process. Recent research tends to mitigate this view. It seems also that a lot of water could have appeared by a combination of hydrogen and oxygen that were already present directly on Earth. But the two ideas are not mutually exclusive. There is also evidence that at least some of that water was delivered to Earth by impacts from icy bodies. In any case, Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and it seems that around at least 4 billion years ago, give or take 100 million years, liquid oceans had appeared. This was thanks to the planet's cool down and its atmospheric conditions that kept enough pressure for liquid water to not evaporate. Because these first oceans were probably quite hot at their surface, hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit, we know there were oceans at the time because samples of pillow basalt dated around 4 billion years ago were found around the world. Pillow basalt is a type of rock that forms during underwater volcanic eruptions, so its existence is good proof that there were oceans when these basalts formed 4 billion years ago. This is for oceans, but what about life? The earliest direct evidence of life has been discovered in sedimentary rocks from Greenland and has been dated to 3.7 billion years ago. What is this evidence? Stromatolites, which are layers of sediments created by mats of microorganisms, bacteria, microbes that could live on chemical reactions using molecules that were present in these oceans, like sulfate, meaning they did not need light and photosynthesis to exist. Of course, these organisms are now fossilized, and these fossils indicate that life was present in water at least 3.7 billion years ago. Earlier than that, there is less conclusive evidence. All the layers of rock that were discovered in Canada or Australia could also be fossilized microorganisms, but their nature and their dating are more disputed. This date, when the first traces of life appeared on Earth, is not just an important debate for paleobiologists that study our planet. It is also relevant for astrobiology, the discipline that studies the hypotheses of life outside of Earth. The planet is 4.5 billion years old, as we said, and if life appeared shortly after, it is an indication that in appropriate conditions, the appearance of life on a planet is likely or can be spontaneous. But if it took hundreds of millions of years, it could suggest that the process may be rare and even may be exceptional. But what happened exactly? How did life appear out of the soup of molecules, of non-living chemicals, which floated in the ocean? And at what point does a pack of molecules qualify as a life form? Biology and research on how life might have emerged to find conditions for a life form to exist. And there are three of them. First, a living organism has to be able to replicate, to produce offspring, which are very similar to itself. Second, it must have metabolism. It must be able to feed and repair itself. Third, a living organism has an inside and an outside. There are cell membranes that allow food to enter, waste products to leave, and that exclude unwanted substances. An open question is, what was the starting point of life? Which of these conditions first appeared? It could be the appearance of RNA molecules, which are complex molecules that have the capacity to self-replicate. So a form of life or pre-life that did not necessarily have metabolism or membranes that separated from its environment could have appeared just based on the replication of RNA molecules. Or the first phenomenon to emerge could have been metabolism. Chemistry indicates that given the right conditions of temperature and pressure, proteins can form from inorganic material like carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide if they are in the presence of the right catalysts, iron and sulfur. And these conditions were probably available in the depths of the Earth's oceans near hydrothermal vents, these natural chimneys that eject heat and chemicals from Earth's mantle. Or the first step could have been the appearance of membranes. Again, chemical conditions on the early Earth were appropriate for lipid molecules to form, and in water, these lipids tend to form bubbles with double walls that create an inside and an outside. This inside might have been the protected environment where other functions could appear. There is no definitive answer to this, but what we know is that around 4 billion years ago, these three functions, replication, metabolism, and separation from the environment by membranes, had come together in the first single-cell organisms. Another hypothesis for the appearance of life on Earth is called panspermia, the possibility that life arrived on Earth from space, or if not life, some of its basic components. It is true that some microorganisms have been proven able to survive the shock of being catapulted into space. So it is theoretically possible, with the intense bombardment of asteroids that happened on the early Earth. Maybe a few simple living organisms arrived like this. They found a suitable environment and multiplied on Earth. Now, it doesn't tell us how life appeared originally. It displaces the question by making it come from another planet or another star system, maybe. So these various hypotheses, possibilities about the appearance of life directly on Earth or its arrival from somewhere else, coexist at this point. None of them are proven, though they appear possible. What we know with more certainty is that at least 3.7 billion years ago, the first single-cell organisms lived and replicated in the oceans, probably in the dark. Photosynthesis, the use of sunlight as an energy source, had not appeared yet, and these life forms lived from chemical reactions based on the elements they found in water. They were bacteria and archaea, two different kinds of single-cell organisms. Around 3.5 billion years ago, a new form of life chemistry appeared with photosynthesis, the conversion of light energy, of sunlight, into chemical energy that can be later released to fuel the organism's activities. The waste product of photosynthesis is oxygen, and the multiplication of single-cell creatures living from photosynthesis had a dramatic impact on the composition of the oceans because they became richer and richer in oxygen that these organisms ejected as waste products of their feeding cycle. The concentration of oxygen rose steadily for 1 billion years until the oceans became saturated and oxygen began to escape into the atmosphere. This happened around 2.4 billion years ago. This phenomenon is called the Great Oxygenation Event, and it paved the way to life on Earth as we know it today, completely transforming the composition of the seas and the atmosphere that initially contained almost no free oxygen. You know that the evolution and classification of species is often represented as a kind of tree. Species branch out, their characteristics change slowly, and they diverge, giving birth to new branches, new organisms. But if there is an evolutionary tree, a phylogenetic tree, as it is called, that is the complicated word for it, and if you can follow its branches and diversifications into all species that have existed, it means you can follow it up in reverse, looking for the first, the most ancient ancestor from which other organisms diverged. This primordial organism, a population that would be the ancestor of all known life, is called LUCA, L-U-C-K, for last universal common ancestor. It is not just a concept, it is a hypothesis based on the observation that all known life forms, ocean-bound or on land, from bacteria to the largest organisms, including plants, fungi, or humans, carry a portion of their genome that is common. It is believed that these common genes, this universal piece of information, comes from the last universal common ancestor. It is hypothesized that it was a single-cell organism that lived about 4 billion years ago in the high-temperature waters of hydrothermal vents near ocean floors. It is not necessarily the first life form ever on Earth, just the one ancestral to existing life. But maybe there were other experiments of nature that have disappeared or remain undiscovered. Marine life evolved apparently very slowly for hundreds of millions of years, from 4 billion years ago to 610 million years ago. The fossil record indicates that life remained based on single-cell microscopic organisms until something clicked. Possibly a minor genetic change that allowed organisms to become made of multiple cells. Thus, the first viable, bigger life forms appeared in the seas, apparently independently. Organisms like sponges or brown algae. Sponges, which have existed since then and still populate our seas, are a unique kind of animal. They are similar to other animals in that they are multicellular. They start small and they grow. They feed on external resources like bacteria. However, they lack true tissue and have no organs. They attach to underwater structures and remain in place, feeding on bacteria that float through their structure. They use calcium carbonate or silicon dioxide in water to build a kind of flexible skeleton. Brown algae, which are another group with thousands of known species, are also very ancient multicellular life forms. Some are attached to the seafloor, while others float freely in mats, always near the surface because they live on photosynthesis. And like sponges, they have evolved since 600 million years ago. But their group has survived every single extinction event since then. The first multicellular organisms were just a taste of what was about to happen. The fossil record indicates that suddenly, over a relatively short period of time, on a geological scale, 13 to 25 million years ago, the number of species, and especially larger species, rose considerably. This happened around 540 million years ago. This sudden diversification has been called the Cambrian Explosion, or sometimes the biological Big Bang. In this relatively short period of time, the oceans became populated with larger, more varied, and more complex animals. Almost all present-day body plans of animals can be traced back to this period, the Cambrian Explosion. It was a period of intense experimentation by nature, if you will. So what did these new animals, bigger than anything before, look like? There was a wealth of small mollusks with shells. They were still tiny, around 1 or 2 millimeters. But they took on a variety of shapes. Some looked like snails, others had the typical hard shells on their upper and lower surfaces, a bit like mussels. There were tubes, and sometimes we find elements in fossilized layers from the period that show us body parts with spines or armor plates. But we don't know how these parts were arranged. Apart from these small shells, there were bigger animals, including echinoderms. Echinoderms are better known as starfish or sea urchins, but this group also included other animals like sea cucumbers and the first trilobites that would populate the oceans for almost 300 million years. Trilobites ranged from a few millimeters to over 12 inches, 30 centimeters, and they are the earliest known form of arthropods. Arthropods represent one of two possible body organizations for relatively large animals that have harder parts. You can be a vertebrate and have a skeleton with flesh and organs around it, like us, but also like fish, dinosaurs, or birds. Or you can have an exoskeleton that protects soft tissue and organs inside. Scorpions, crabs, centipedes, or butterflies are arthropods. They have this exoskeleton and a segmented body for movement. They are an extreme diverse group in seas and on land, which shows their adaptability. But their body plan comes with a limitation in terms of size. In order to keep growing, they need to go through stages of molting. That is to say, they have to shed their exoskeleton to reveal a new one, flexible at first, that allows them to grow. As we are going to see, arthropods had a strong start as predators in the oceans of the Cambrian and the Ordovician periods. The Ordovician is a period that followed the Cambrian. Giant sea scorpions appeared that were at the top of the food chain, and we know them relatively well because their exoskeletons fossilized easily. So we have abundant evidence of their existence that lasted for millions of years. These creatures evolved into many ecological niches. Some lived near the seabed as predators or scavengers. Others swam and fed by filtering plankton. And some even crawled onto land as one of the species that began later to colonize the new environment out of the water. Ancient echinoderms like starfish, trilobites, and these different kinds of mollusks with shells look familiar to us because these animals are the ancestors of others that have retained their body plans. But it seems that during the intense experimentation or proliferation of life forms during the Cambrian Explosion, many more organisms that would now look really strange also appeared. We know some of them thanks to well-preserved soft parts that were found in the Burgess Shale, a site in British Columbia, Canada, and after that in various other sites around the world that are dated from the Cambrian period. These sites revealed an ecosystem with the various families I just discussed, but also very weird-looking creatures that apparently did not survive into later periods. One example is Opabinia, the name given to a soft-bodied animal with a slim and segmented body that carried flap-like appendages on each segment, 5 eyes, and a mouth that faced backwards under the head, as if the various body parts we are familiar with in animals had been redistributed in a way that has no living equivalent today. Another example is Odontogryphus, a flat and oval soft-bodied animal that apparently had a single muscular foot and a kind of shell on its back. Yet another creature of the Cambrian, and the one considered to be one of the first examples of an apex predator, a predator that has no predator, was an early arthropod called Anomalocaris, literally meaning abnormal shrimp. It had a body length of about 40 centimeters, 1.3 feet. Doesn't sound like a lot, but with a size like that in the oceans of the Cambrian, it was a gigantic organism. It propelled itself in the water by undulating, flexible flaps on the sides of its body, and it had two flexible appendages on the front, presumably to catch prey and bring them to its mouth. It also had a pair of eyes, an evolution that existed in other arthropods, but Anomalocaris probably had the best eyes of its time. They were comparatively enormous, more than 1 inch, which probably gave it a huge advantage as a hunter in shallow waters. There were few fish yet. We'll talk about fish in a minute. And it is believed Anomalocaris preyed on other arthropods and mollusks. 488 million years ago, the Cambrian period ended. Like all the periods we will talk about, the end of a period and the beginning of another one was marked by an extinction event. This is how these different periods have been established. An extinction event, that is to say, a quick reduction in the number of species, especially the largest ones, generally revealed by fossil records. The following period is called Ordovician, and I'm not going to detail all the periods one by one to our times, because there is a dozen. Despite extinctions between them, species disappeared, but classes of animals continued through these periods. The Ordovician period deserves to be mentioned, though, because it started when the Cambrian ended and lasted for 42 million years. During it, a second major radiation, a flourishing of life of the same magnitude as the Cambrian explosion, happened. It is during this period that the complexity of marine ecosystems deepened to the levels that have characterized marine life to our days. The number of genera, the groups of species, was multiplied by 4 during the Ordovician era. Fish evolved from earlier forms and began to acquire jaws at the end of the period. Mollusks became bigger and more evolved, with cephalopods like Nautilus becoming large animals. New predators appeared, like sea scorpions and a giant cephalopod shaped like a cone called Orthoceras. That's a lot of words. What does it all mean? Let's take things one by one. Fish are marine vertebrates. They have an internal skeleton, including a skull, breathe underwater, and lack limbs with digits. The earliest ancestors of fish, the first organisms that can be classified as such, appear during the Cambrian period. They lacked a true spine at first, but they had a flexible rod called the notochord, similar in structure to cartilage. The skeleton of modern fish is made of cartilage, but notochords are not as stiff. Even though notochords are not cartilage or bones, they gave them a structure and agility that invertebrates didn't have. They could swim, accelerate, change depth, and later hunt better than other families of Cambrian animals. This characteristic allowed them to find a place and thrive in the late Cambrian and Ordovician periods, diversifying into a wide variety of forms. At the end of the Ordovician, or the beginning of the following period, the Silurian, they acquired jaws, and some of their representatives became formidable marine predators rather than the prey of arthropods like sea scorpions. Fish predators might make us think about sharks, but the time of the sharks had not arrived yet. They appeared also during the Ordovician, but they were much smaller than they would become, and they fell somewhere in the middle of the food chain, feeding on small animals and being prey to larger fish and arthropods. Many modern sharks can be traced back to about 100 million years ago, long after the Ordovician, during the Jurassic period. From there, they slowly moved up to the top of the food chain in the ocean, culminating rather recently, 23 to 4 million years ago, with the megalodon, a species of giant shark that is regarded as one of the largest and most powerful marine predators that have ever lived. It could have reached up to 66 feet, 20 meters, with an astonishing speed and bite force that left it with no equivalent at the time it lived. The modern great shark is thought to be a relative, but the two diverged during the Cretaceous period, though they are not part of the exact same family. Even though the megalodon may have looked like a much bigger great white shark, we don't know exactly what it looked like because sharks' skeletons are made of cartilage rather than bones and don't fossilize well. There is no full fossil megalodon, only separate vertebrae, jaws, and teeth, from which the characteristics of the animal are extrapolated. The age of the megalodon was almost yesterday in geological terms. It ended 4 million years ago. But if we return to the Ordovician, 450 million years ago, sharks were more modest. Before their time arrived, the first true fish apex predators would be a class of armored fish called placoderms. As they gained in size, these fish developed armored plates on their head and thorax during the Silurian period, 440 to 420 million years ago. They acquired very powerful jaws, and it seems an evolutionary race took place between bigger and bigger placoderms with more powerful jaws and protective armor. By the end of their domination, 360 million years ago, many of the largest placoderms belonged to a genus, a group of species called Dunkleosteus. These are relatively well known because their heads and armor plates fossilized very well. The largest species is estimated to have grown up to 29 feet, 9 meters in length, and weighed up to 4 tons. Their strength, and especially their bite force, suggests that they hunted other placoderms and crushed their helmet plates. Placoderms became extinct at the end of the Devonian period, 360 million years ago, after a reign of dozens of millions of years in the Earth's oceans. But the story of fish continues with their diversity and their ability to adapt to different environments, whether marine or freshwater, at different depths. These adaptations ensured their survival. Today, fish have more than 30,000 different described species, and there are probably many more at great depths, which makes them the most diverse of all groups of vertebrates. But returning to ancient vertebrates, they were not the only ones to gain in size and strength. Mollusks and arthropods also evolved significantly. A large group that flourished at the time was the nautiloids, which still exist but used to be much bigger and more abundant than they are today. They are mollusks living and swimming in shells that can be of different shapes, coiled or sometimes straight like cones. One of their representatives that dominated the seas long before the rise of armed fish was a genus called Orthoceras, literally straight horn. It had a very long, straight shell shaped like a cone, and it could be up to 11 meters long, more than 30 feet, and they used tentacles to catch prey. But all these are just a few examples of marine ecosystems that were probably already close to the diversity we know today. Many families flourished, including corals, starfish, sponges, all sorts of mollusks and trilobites, and plenty of tiny crustaceans. As I mentioned, arthropods also participated in the size race, particularly with eurypterids, also known as sea scorpions. These sea scorpions became a major component of marine fauna until 420 million years ago, before declining and disappearing 250 million years ago. Although earlier species were only marine, later ones may have had a dual respiratory system that allowed them to venture on land for short periods of time. They had the broad morphology of a scorpion, but with different proportions. Their pincers to manipulate food were not very big, and their bodies were sturdier. A size of 3.5 feet was common for them, even though there were much smaller ones, and also the largest known arthropod that ever existed, a genus called Echolopterus. I told you before that arthropods were somewhat limited in size by their exoskeleton and the necessity to shed it to grow. Another limitation is the respiratory system, especially for land arthropods. They don't have lungs similar to vertebrates, and it is believed to be the reason why land arthropods never reached great sizes. They cannot breathe enough to sustain a large and compact body. The largest arthropods to have lived out of water were prehistoric dragonflies that could be much larger than modern insects, with a wingspan of several feet. That is still not huge compared to vertebrates. It is believed the air was richer in oxygen at that time. These same species of dragonflies could no longer survive in our modern atmosphere. So the largest ever arthropod was aquatic, and it could reach around 8 feet, 2.5 meters. But it is uncertain if it really lived in the sea. The layers in which Eucalyptus fossils were found suggest that it could have lived in a freshwater environment. Maybe. Millions and millions of years passed, during which these various animals thrived and declined. After the Ordovician came the Silurian and the Devonian, sometimes called the Age of Fish, when armored fish dominated the seas. On land, the first plants had begun to spread, and large parts of the continents now looked green. The following period, the Carboniferous, is when future reserves of coal and oil began to form, as for millions of years this vegetation became trapped under layers of sediments, and the process of coalification began. The seas of the Carboniferous were still teeming with life, but some of the earliest groups of complex species, such as trilobites, were now declining. But fish were thriving. The age of placoderms, these sometimes very large armored fish, had ended, but sharks were multiplying. Fish species that we would find relatively familiar coexisted with extinct fish species that would look extremely weird to us. Fish like Acmonistian, looking like a small shark but with a large dorsal fin that looked a bit like an anvil of unknown function, or the coelacanths, bony fishes that are related to the ancestors of tetrapods. The tetrapods are the first amphibians that colonized the land. For a long time, coelacanths were thought to have disappeared in the late Cretaceous, 66 million years ago, until 1938, when living coelacanths were discovered off the coast of South Africa. For that reason, it was called a living fossil, because following this discovery, scientists believed that they were the sole remaining member of a group that was thought to be extinct, and that they had remained unchanged for tens of millions of years. This view of the coelacanths was a bit exaggerated because, since then, other studies have revealed that coelacanths' body shapes are much more diverse than thought. And yes, they have changed since the Cretaceous. But still, this fish appeared 400 million years ago, and their descendants still live in our oceans, looking almost the same. The 6 periods from the Cambrian, when the Cambrian Explosion took place, to the Carboniferous, and finally another period called Permian, are grouped together in larger divisions of time. An era called the Paleozoic era. Literally, Paleozoic means ancient life. Why group these 6 periods together into an era? Because at the end of the Permian, a particularly large and catastrophic extinction event took place, one that affected much more than in between these periods. It did not fully reset marine life. Many of the different categories of animals that we have discussed made it to the following era, the Mesozoic, middle life, but the number of species dropped dramatically, and all their large representatives were wiped out. It took life millions of years to recover into this new era, the Mesozoic, and its first period, 250 to 200 million years ago, called the Triassic. The rulers of the seas that emerged during this period would be quite different from the arthropods, mollusks, and armored fish that had dominated during the Paleozoic. This new age saw the rise in size and strength of marine reptiles. The apex predators and many other medium-sized species would now be reptiles that had transitioned back from land to sea and become adapted to full-time aquatic life, even though they kept breathing air. They include the ichthyosaurs that look like dolphins or fish, except they were reptiles, and the sauropterygians, which at the time came in a variety of sizes and shapes, including placodonts that developed armor on their backs that made them look a little bit like turtles, even though they were not turtles, or plesiosaurs. Speaking of turtles, the Triassic is also when these particular reptiles appeared on Earth. Their main characteristic, the shell on their back that enclosed all the vital organs of the turtle, is made of bone that develops from their rib cage and is covered in scales made of keratin. Keratin is a material of hair, horns, or claws that many animals can grow, including us humans. As the Mesozoic advanced into a new period, the Jurassic, the time when dinosaurs dominated the land, marine life saw a few innovations. These include the first modern crabs and also the earliest octopuses. We are now 200 million years ago, and these mollusks with 8 limbs first appeared near the seafloor in shallow marine environments. Most of their body is soft tissue, and for that reason fossils are relatively rare, but enough were found to figure out their evolutionary history. From the first mollusks of the Cambrian that branched out several times, giving birth to a large category called cephalopods. Cephalopods appeared 530 million years ago and are characterized by a symmetrical body, prominent head, and a set of arms or tentacles. They also have a common ability to squirt ink to surprise or escape. Cephalopods split a few times into new families like nautiloids, or the one that includes squids and cuttlefish. And finally, 155 million years ago, octopods, of which all octopuses are part. Modern species have changed since the Jurassic, but they retain the same body characteristics, and they have been quite good at adapting to different depths and environments. Their sizes range from 1 inch to 14 feet for the largest modern species, the giant Pacific octopus, but exceptionally bigger sizes have been claimed for a few specimens up to 30 feet. They don't really have much time to grow because their lifespan is relatively short. Once males have fertilized a female, they enter a process of senescence. That is to say, their cellular functions gradually stop without repair or replacement, which leads to death in a few weeks or months at most. For females, it happens when they lay a clutch of eggs. They spend their last days caring for their eggs without feeding, and when the eggs hatch, they die. An exception is the Pacific striped octopus that can reproduce several times, but it still doesn't live more than 2 years. This short lifespan is probably a big limitation because octopuses have been proven to be highly intelligent for invertebrates. They have a complex nervous system, which is only partially localized in their brains. 2/3 of their neurons are in their arms, and they have a high brain-to-body ratio. Intelligence does not depend just on the size of the brain. But in the case of octopuses, they have been observed to be good at problem solving, like finding and remembering the exit to a maze or opening containers. And they have both short-term and long-term memory. They can train and learn in a way that is quite extraordinary in the animal realm. What limits them is their short life and the absence of transmission to the young. Females typically die as the eggs are hatching, like I mentioned, so every new generation has to start over, which excludes an accumulation of experience and knowledge like for humans. But who knows if in the next million years, an evolution like a mutation of their genome could give octopuses a longer lifespan and the possibility to educate their young. There could theoretically be an emergence of a new species able to accumulate experience. But the interesting thing would be that most species that have shown intelligence are mammals, whereas octopuses have a very different architecture of their nervous system. After the Jurassic, the Mesozoic ended with its last period, the Cretaceous. Marine ecosystems were still dominated by marine reptiles, except Ichthyosaurus declined, and a group of new, sometimes very large predators emerged, the Mosasaurus. At the end of the Cretaceous and the Mesozoic, a major catastrophic extinction event occurred, one that wiped out dinosaurs, though not entirely, since it is believed that birds are a surviving branch. But all non-avian dinosaurs disappeared on land, and all large species also went missing, putting an end to the age of marine reptiles. And again, not all of them, as sea turtles made it to the following period, the Paleogene. During the Paleogene, life slowly radiated again, but this time the new masters of the seas would be sharks, which we already discussed, occupying the niches left vacant, and cetaceans, which also transitioned from land to sea as marine reptiles had done 200 million years earlier. Also the rise of whales and their diversification, such as hunting whales, that today include dolphins, orcas, and sperm whales, and filter-feeding whales, like blue whales and other species. They are still predators today, but somewhat more peaceful than their predecessors like Basilosaurus, which was the marine apex predator 40 to 34 million years ago. Finally, in the Neogene and the Quaternary periods, the Quaternary is our period, marine life took its modern form after hundreds of millions of years of evolution, with the coexistence of very ancient organisms like sponges or simple mollusks, a huge variety of fish or corals, and thousands of species that emerged since, from octopods, crustaceans, and turtles to cetaceans. A world of beauty, at the same time fragile but extremely resilient and adaptable, as we have seen all along our journey. And buried in the layers of sediments, this marine world includes the remains of thousands upon thousands of species, large and small, that appeared, flourished for thousands of generations, and went extinct due to competition from others or a change in their environment that they could not adapt to, or extinction events. All of these forms are in our modern oceans, a world we have learned about a lot in the past few decades, but that is still full of mystery, of unknown and undescribed species, of unfamiliar ecosystems, especially in the depths of the abyss, where pressure is enormous and where there is no sunlight. We've come to the end of our journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep. Or if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.